Why did I write? Firstly, I first heard about Bill O'Brien, of course, some time after I'd heard of Larkin, and I'd heard about Larkin vaguely, firstly through G.D.H. Cole's book on the British Labour movement, you know, the red one. But it wasn't until about 62, 63, there was a Thomas Davis lecture around that time on the Labour movement. I was listening to it with my cousin, Dr. Charles Lysaght of the Department of Health, and it mentioned the split in the Transport Union in 1923, and Charlie remarked, chuckling, "No names, no pack drill, I see," and he told me that if you like, Larkin's nemesis in the split was a man called Bill O'Brien. So I started looking, it began to take shape, and then later I wrote an article, discovered that Bill O'Brien had done a lot to organise the union and the labour movement after 1916, and also that he'd been to a certain extent, the grey eminence, you might say, of being split in the Labour Party and the Trade Union Congress in the 1940s. So I had mixed thoughts about him. I later read the biography that he was sort of dictated to my other cousin Ned Lysaght, Forth the Banners Go, and felt that it was distinctly an inadequate discovery, and I now see that when I started looking into the history of the labour movement after 1916, which is a thesis in UCD file somewhere, I realised that O'Brien was carefully keeping, in fact kept mum to a great extent about what he was doing in the period after 1916, and emphasising it that he was almost an auxiliary, basically an auxiliary to Doyle Aaron and all that. I mean, a classic case is his account of the conscriptions crisis of 1918, and if reading it, you wouldn't realise that that the Congress organised a general strike in that time, and he was president of Congress at that time, and he completely ignores it. He goes on about gossip about how he taught, what he said to Dillon or what he said to De Valera, and how his visit to the bishops in Maynooth and all that sort of thing, but nothing about the thing in which he was most central. So I began to think of writing a field that sort of a more accurate account of Bill O'Brien in his times was necessary. And I gave actually gave two successive papers on Bill in, I think, about 77, 78. Another one around, I think, 80, it was definitely 81, because it was the centenary of his birth. And then I wrote it all up and put it into Saothar, and that's where it was. Okay, my thoughts on Bill O'Brien. I generally negative. I mean, he bears, I would say, he less negative than they were. He at least made a struggle against the Johnson line after 1916. I mean, it wasn't, but his abilities were not up to it. Johnson, to a great extent, took Connolly's place as his ideological mentor, and this idea of Bill seemed to square the circle of how to build one big union and how to, within the context of the national struggle, and that was undoubtedly appealed to him. And it was all going to be done fairly peaceably, and the Shinners and the IRA were going to do the fighting, and then the Labour would step in. This was sort of the implicit ideas. To be fair, O'Brien did try to move in on to get a tighter connection with the Republican movement through the Count Plunkett's Mansion House Committee in April 1917. There was a meeting after Plunkett had been elected, and they set up a committee to plan further Republican interventions. O'Brien was nominated from the Trades Council at that time. He was only a new member of the Transport Union officially, though he was already probably much more than that. But he was interested in the Trades Council as acting General Secretary, and he went on to it and was told in no uncertain terms, as he records in his memoirs, that he was told that there would be a clash of interests between that and his trade union career. So he resigns from the committee at the end of May 1917. His resignation, again, it's all a bit like one of these jokes in which you lose the punchline. I mean, he builds up to it and then doesn't mention the fact that he resigns in his book. It's I think this may be a printer's error, I don't know, but they're there in his papers, including his resignation letter. He complained that it was too close, the closeness to statements by Sinn Féin, and of course he worked in. He worked in De Valera's campaign, but then seems to have dropped out completely, particularly probably because Cosgrave was the candidate in Kilkenny City, the fourth of the historic by-elections of 1917, that prepared the way for United Sinn Féin and its victory. Thoughts on William O'Brien again. As I said, he was a great organiser, but organising what and for the strategic, he was prepared to follow Larkin, Connolly. I mean, it was significant, actually. It's significant when you think about it, that his original breach with Connolly in '03, he was part of the Stewart current, and E.W. Stewart idea was that basically the party should be pinned, sort of cut down to size. You didn't need a periodical. You didn't really need permanent headquarters. Basically, it was sort of to be an election machine to elect a socialist to the corporation, and as the most successful candidate of the ISRP, E.W. Stewart would presumably be that candidate. And of course, later on, he was expelled from the SPI by O'Brien, amongst others, for being for supporting J.P. Nanetti, the NatLab candidate, the NatLab MP, I think in College Green, and of course then he would be a bitter opponent of Larkin and O'Brien, and published a pamphlet denouncing them all, denouncing them and Daly. But interestingly, the wheel turned full circle, of course, because by the end of his life, O'Brien was voting Fianna Fáil. So it changed. His idea ultimately was to build the one big union, the union of all the Irish workers, and ultimately he succeeded in this. But firstly, what was the political strategy? He left that to people at Collier, then to Johnson, and how to, the question of taking state power he never seemed to have gotten beyond the idea of breaking the eggshell when it was ready, and not trying to use the beak, as it were, to break through the eggshell. The party, his idea of the party never got beyond the propagandist organisation, and then eventually he abandoned that for the Labour Party, and then it was National Labour as the spokesperson of effectively of the Congress of Irish Unions, and in fact almost entirely this Congress, the Transport Union, and then when that failed, he just moved to work to support the Labour Party. And of course, as Barry Desmond has pointed out, the tradition by the 50s, the tradition was strong enough for the Transport Union to be almost the Fianna Fáil's, the leadership of the Transport Union to be almost the Fianna Fáil's union, and sort of Conroy and Barry Desmond did Rayner Lysaght, and other people had to move it back to the Labour Party, and that's where it has remained since then.